She ran from a crime for nearly 30 years, but now Zina Roberson is going to prison for murder.
I am so sorry. I wish I could bring her back, but I can't. I am so sorry.
So much pain, you know, and it's like,
On June 26, 1987, an ordinary day took a horrific turn when 77-year-old Anna Mae Florence, a sweet and trusting woman who had recently moved to Columbus, Ohio, opened her door to a stranger. The visitor, a young woman posing as a charity worker, would be the last person Anna Mae would ever meet. What began as an act of kindness ended in a brutal struggle, leaving Anna Mae's family devastated and haunted by unanswered questions for nearly 3 decades. Welcome to Urban Crime Stories. If you are new to the channel, please subscribe and turn on all notifications for upcoming episodes. Anna Mae Florence was a 77-year-old woman who had become a cherished member of her community in Columbus, Ohio. Known for her kindness and vivid storytelling, she shared stories of her life that captured the hearts of those around her. Her neighbors described her as a gentle, sweet-natured woman who could captivate anyone with tales of her past. Anna Mae's life hadn't been easy. She had spent most of her years on a small farm in the rural backwoods of Alabama. It was a life of hard work, but she faced each challenge with resilience and an unbreakable spirit, traits that only made her more endearing to those who met her. When her husband passed away, Anna Mae found herself alone. With no children to care for her, the responsibility fell to her extended family. Her relatives decided to bring her to Columbus, believing it was the best place for her to live out her later years in comfort. They felt she would be safer there, and that the move would give them an opportunity to care for her more closely. It was a chance for Anna Mae to escape the hardships of rural life, and her family hoped she might finally experience the ease and companionship she deserved. Settling into her new life in Columbus, Anna Mae quickly became a beloved figure among her neighbors and family alike. Her gentle presence brought warmth to those around her, and she was eager to share tales from her life on the farm, recounting both hardships and heartwarming moments. Columbus, with its familiar faces and newfound community, became a place of peace for her. Her family grew closer to her, finding joy in her stories and in her company. It seemed that Anna Mae's final years would be filled with love and support, a comforting change from the lonely years she had spent on her own. But on June 26, 1987, Anna Mae Florence's life took a shocking and tragic turn. What had begun as an ordinary day suddenly descended into horror, marking a day that her family and community would never forget. The details of that day remain etched into the memories of those who knew her, forever changing their perception of what should have been a time of security and happiness for her. In an instant, the stability and happiness she had found were shattered, leaving her family to grapple with an immense sense of loss and disbelief. They had brought her to Columbus with the best intentions, hoping it would bring her safety and joy. Instead, they were confronted with a heart-wrenching tragedy that no one could have anticipated. Anna Mae's peaceful life had been interrupted in the cruelest way imaginable, leaving her family reeling with sorrow. On the morning of June 26, 1987, a young woman appeared at Anna Mae's door on Delavan Drive, claiming she was raising money for charity. Anna Mae, who was known for her kindness and generous spirit, opened the door to this unexpected visitor. She had only recently moved to Columbus, and it was in her nature to welcome strangers with trust and warmth. Other residents in the complex later reported similar visits from the same young woman that day, all under the pretense of soliciting donations for charity. But this visit to Anna Mae's home would end in tragedy. Anna Mae invited the woman inside, intending to give a small donation. She offered her guests some money, hoping it would help the supposed cause. However, it quickly became clear that this stranger was not satisfied with what Anna Mae had given. Tensions rose as the woman demanded more, pushing Anna Mae's generosity to a dangerous limit. A struggle soon broke out, and in a desperate attempt to defend herself, Anna Mae reached for a kitchen knife, but the intruder managed to take it from her, turning Anna Mae's own weapon against her. The confrontation took a horrific turn as Anna Mae was stabbed multiple times in her own home. Later that same morning, Anna Mae's sister and brother-in-law arrived at her Delavan Drive apartment to take her shopping, as they often did to help her adjust to her new life in Columbus. As they approached, they saw a young woman bolting out of Anna Mae's front door. Sensing that something was wrong, her brother-in-law reached out to grab the fleeing woman's arm, but his grip slipped. His hand, covered in blood from the woman's arm, couldn't hold her, and she escaped before they could fully grasp what had happened. With a rising sense of dread, Anna Mae's sister and brother-in-law rushed into the apartment. The horrifying scene that awaited them confirmed their worst fears. Anna Mae had been left fatally wounded, the life she had worked so hard to build now shattered in an act of senseless violence. When emergency responders arrived, it was too late to save her. She was pronounced dead in her own home, the place that should have offered her the security and peace her family had wanted for her. News of Anna Mae's murder spread quickly through the north side of Columbus, leaving residents and family alike in shock and grief. Her sudden and violent death felt like an assault on the values she embodied, casting a shadow over the lives of those who had loved and cherished her. Neighbors were left to reflect on the tragic irony that Anna Mae's trusting nature, the very quality that had made her so beloved, had also made her vulnerable to a stranger's cruelty. As the investigation into Anna Mae Florence's tragic death began, her family and detectives tried to piece together of what led her to open the door to a stranger on that fateful day. Those closest to Anna Mae believed her warm nature and willingness to help others had made her vulnerable to deception. She hadn't suspected that a visitor requesting donations could pose any danger. Anna Mae, who distrusted banks, had always carried her savings in a money belt, keeping cash close at hand, a belt that was conspicuously missing after the attack. Despite her kind disposition, Anna Mae hadn't given up without a fight. Evidence showed she had fought back with everything she had, even managing to wound her attacker before succumbing to her injuries. Unfortunately, despite these early leads, investigators found themselves working with limited resources and evidence. They struggled to identify the elusive young woman seen fleeing Anna Mae's apartment. With little to go on and no immediate suspects, the case gradually went cold. For nearly 3 decades, Anna Mae's family lived with the heartbreak of knowing her killer had escaped justice, while her community was left to mourn the loss of a beloved elder with no sense of closure. Over the years, the memory of Anna Mae Florence and the unanswered questions surrounding her death faded from public awareness, but her family's desire for justice remained as strong as ever. In 2012, Anna Mae's niece, Rebecca, contacted the authorities, urging them to reopen the case. She felt it was time to re-examine the evidence, hoping that advances in forensic science might bring new insights to light. Her request led detectives to re-evaluate the evidence in January 2013, sparking renewed interest in Anna Mae's case. Among the names linked to the investigation, the name Zina Roberson hadn't surfaced initially, and she wasn't in the original suspect pool. Detectives faced challenges tracing connections from nearly 30 years ago, as many witnesses had either moved away or were deceased. However, the few remaining neighbors who remembered the event recalled it vividly, providing valuable details to aid the reinvestigation. In a significant breakthrough, investigators discovered that DNA evidence collected from the crime scene matched a woman named Zina Roberson. This critical link came from biological evidence preserved since the night of Anna Mae's murder, an item that had gone untested in the initial investigation due to limited resources. With the advancement of DNA technology, the previously silent evidence had finally spoken, pointing directly to Roberson. The revelation was both relieving and challenging for detectives, as they now had a name connected to the crime, but no clear knowledge of Roberson's whereabouts. Tracking down Roberson's current location became the immediate focus. The decades-long delay had allowed her to vanish without a trace, leaving detectives with the arduous task of locating a suspect who might have changed her identity or moved away. For the family, this development brought a glimmer of hope that justice was within reach. Yet the question loomed: where was Zina Roberson, and what would it take to finally bring her to account for Anna Mae Florence's death? Not long after investigators finally pinpointed Zina Roberson's location, she was found living quietly in northwestern Georgia. For nearly 20 years, Roberson had led an unassuming life in the town of Rome, Georgia, blending into the community with little to no legal issues on her record. The only stain on her record during that time was a shoplifting charge in 1999, followed by a probation violation in 2001. Despite the seriousness of her alleged crime decades earlier, she had managed to stay largely under the radar, avoiding any significant encounters with law enforcement. Her life in Rome seemed ordinary, no indication of the violent past that had haunted Anna Mae's family for years. On a fateful morning on August 15, 2013, Columbus, Ohio police, in collaboration with officers from Georgia, arrived at Zina's workplace, a small takeout restaurant where she had been employed. Columbus detectives, after working tirelessly on this cold case, had finally tracked down Roberson's current whereabouts with the help of local law enforcement. After confirming her place of employment, authorities located her nearby apartment. When they moved in to make the arrest, Roberson appeared visibly shaken. Witnesses described her as breaking out in a sweat, though she did not put up a struggle. The quiet, law-abiding life she had maintained for so long had come to an abrupt end, as she was taken into custody on a charge of aggravated murder. The arrest marked a significant turning point in the case, bringing both relief and a sense of justice to Anna Mae Florence's family. After years of patiently waiting, they finally had a suspect in custody. Roberson's time in hiding had been marked by meticulous caution, with no other criminal activity or even police reports in over a decade. According to sources, she had kept a very low profile in the Rome, Georgia community, likely attempting to avoid drawing any attention to herself. Her neighbors and co-workers, unaware of her past, were shocked by the news, struggling to reconcile the quiet woman they knew with the serious charges she now faced. As detectives began to unravel the details of her years in Georgia, they looked for evidence of any behaviors that might hint at her past, yet found little. Roberson had lived discreetly, avoiding situations that might lead to police interaction. Her neighbors described her as polite but distant, someone who rarely engaged in conversation or made friends. She had lived almost as if she were invisible, maintaining an existence that allowed her to fly under law enforcement's radar for so many years. Following her arrest, Roberson was extradited to Columbus, Ohio, where she would face charges tied to Anna Mae's murder. For the investigators who had worked tirelessly on the case, and for Anna Mae's family, this was a moment of long-awaited justice. The once cold case had come alive again, propelled by forensic advancements and determined detective work, leading to a suspect finally being held accountable for a heinous crime committed decades earlier. On Monday, August 25, 2014, nearly a year after her arrest, Zina Roberson stood in Franklin County Court in Central Ohio to face justice for the murder of Anna Mae Florence.
They caught up to Zina Roberson. She was living in Rome, Georgia. Cold case detectives found new fingerprint evidence in the bloody scene and got a witness to admit that Roberson had confessed. At her sentencing today, Roberson admitted to it again.
I am so sorry. I wish I could bring her back, but I can't. I am so sorry.
But sorry just can't erase 27 years of grief.
I had part of the responsibility to go back to that apartment where she was killed, to clean up that mess, and to get that stuff out, and I am still wounded.
The 50-year-old, who had eluded authorities for almost 3 decades, ultimately pleaded guilty to a murder charge. In a somber courtroom, Roberson received a sentence of 15 years to life, meaning she would likely spend the remainder of her life behind bars.
The judge
to violently kill
gave Roberson
a senior citizen is just so reprehensible.
a sentence of 15 years to life. Even that couldn't dry the family's tears.
So much pain, and it's like,
Her plea allowed the court to avoid a lengthy trial and brought a swift conclusion to a case that had been cold for so long. Originally, Roberson had been indicted on a more severe count of aggravated murder, which could have led to an even harsher penalty. However, by pleading guilty, she avoided the possibility of a death sentence or life without parole. For Anna Mae's family, the plea offered a measure of closure and relief, though they were reminded of the pain and loss they'd carried since that tragic day in 1987. The sentencing marked the end of their nearly 30-year journey to secure justice for Anna Mae allowing them to finally honor her memory with some sense of peace. What are your thoughts about this tragic story? Please share your comments in the comments down below. Remember, if you are new to the channel, please subscribe and turn on all notifications for upcoming crime stories. Your support is greatly appreciated. Until next time, I will see you on another episode of Urban Crime Stories.